Welcome back. So, government is facing the tough task of tracking allegations of millions of rands worth of alleged tender irregularities and potential corruption linked to COVID-19 funds. Government's responded by setting up an investigation centre and authorising the SIU to probe allegations in all sectors of the state. But are our law enforcement agencies capable of delivering on this speedily? Let's get some analysis now from the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Programme at the Institute for Security Studies, Gareth Newham. So, Gareth, the President quite forceful there in speaking about how government plans to clamp down on the alleged theft of COVID-19 related funds. Some of the immediate reaction from South Africans being to simply laugh it off and say, we'll believe it when we see it. What do you say?
Well, I think the concerns that people have raised about this are legitimate. We have not yet seen any high-profile prosecutions of politicians or government officials involved in state capture. So to date, I think most people are a bit skeptical when they hear promises of crackdowns on corruption. Because, as I said, we have not seen the kinds of arrests and prosecutions taking place of people where there seems to be mountains of evidence against them, and this evidence has been in the public domain for many years. However, I think that if the Special Investigation Unit is focused on this, it has a chance of at least preventing money from being stolen and recovering money, because that's actually what its main function is. So I think it's important to realize that the Special Investigation Unit will not result in or necessarily lead to the prosecutions of people, but its main function is to investigate allegations where money might have been stolen or misused or misappropriated. It can also stop contracts. It can prevent money from being paid over. So in that way, it will try and then take evidence in those investigations and then hand that in evidence either over to the Hawks for further investigation, to the NPA for possible prosecutions, or to government departments where individuals might be disciplined. But that's as far as it can go.
Right. I suppose in trying a sign perhaps that he was trying to get ahead of the skepticism, President Cyril Ramaphosa said last night that what's going to happen is that he's going to receive interim reports every 6 weeks on the progress that's being made in these investigations. That sounds pretty much easier said than done, because to receive a report does not necessarily mean that progress has been made, does it?
Well, I suppose it will certainly put the investigators under a lot more pressure if they know they have to report to the President every 6 weeks. This might be a strategy to overcome the challenges they had with state capture, because most of the corruption and the unlawful activities that took place during state capture happened over the last decade. So in many cases, a lot of the evidence has gone missing. Witnesses, their memories might be failing, or they might have been bribed or threatened not to cooperate. And those are very complex cases. So what he might be trying to do is, if this corruption is taking place now or has just taken place, and he focuses the law enforcement agencies onto allegations where there's evidence now, he might be able to start demonstrating that people are being arrested and prosecuted much more quickly than the more complex and longer-term investigations that are taking place under the state capture sort of umbrella. So this might be a way of thinking, well, if I can demonstrate that I've said I'm going to take action, and I put the pressure of the presidency on these investigations, I want a report every 6 weeks, and we start seeing investigations that lead to arrests and prosecutions more quickly, that'll help take away some of the cynicism and skepticism about my commitment to tackling corruption. That's one way of reading this.
Should the proclamation for the SIU have come sooner?
Well, I think, we've seen evidence emerging more recently. The proclamation process usually means that there has to be some assessment first about, is the evidence valid, where's it coming from, how much evidence is there, what are we looking at. So I think as soon as that process had been undertaken and they've decided that there was a need for a much more thorough investigation, he signed the proclamation. I don't have enough information to determine whether this is the right time or if it should have happened sooner or not.
And of course the SIU, the Hawks and crime intelligence will all be part of this investigation centre that will be set up at a capacity level, given just what you touched on with state capture, for example, and the various other cases, the heavy caseload. Is there capacity to get through everything speedily, but also successfully where prosecutions are concerned?
I think that's where the big challenge is going to come from, because currently all the most experienced investigators, prosecutors are seized with a large caseload. stuff coming out of the state capture inquiries, investigations, everyday crime that's happening around the country. So now you're going to take that capacity and give it additional work. They might prioritize these COVID-related cases of corruption and misappropriation of public funds, but that'll probably be at the expense of other investigations and other prosecutions. So it might mean that we'll see that other cases take much longer to be finalized if the current capacity is now reorientated towards what the President was talking about last night.
It then raises the question of what it's going to take for law enforcement agencies in the country to regain some of the lost public support, because it's very worrying when in a situation where the President announces that organs of the state will tackle corruption, and a lot of people say, oh, well, we've heard that before.
Well, yes, and I think the only way the criminal justice system can build credibility again is through high-profile prosecutions. We need to see very powerful politicians, senior ministers being arrested. We need to see senior politicians being arrested and prosecuted, senior business people in the private sector that have been involved in corruption being arrested and prosecuted. That is the only way credibility can be built. But unfortunately, the damage that was done to the criminal justice system agencies during the last 9 years of state capture is so profound that a lot of rebuilding has to take place. And that is one of the big frustrations, I think. It's so difficult to fix the system while trying to undertake adequate investigations into what are really quite complex crimes. The people who committed a lot of these high-level grand corruption cases that we hear about were aided by lawyers, by accountants, who created systems of hiding money and getting money out of the country illegally. So it's about trying to rebuild that capacity, investigate, prosecute, and then take on new cases, because the criminal justice system, there's not a sudden halt of corruption in the country. In fact, we've seen many cases occurring more recently. So it is really a balancing act. And I think it is about trying to make sure that you get some high-profile people before the courts as soon as possible. And certainly on key issues where the President has made promises now, we're going to have to make sure that some of the cases where there's been alleged corruption related to the COVID funding happen much quicker than usual. So that's the only real way we will see credibility being rebuilt in the criminal justice system.